Wonder how long that tree has stood there. But the restoration is lovely in the sense that it gives us a counterpoint of reference and understanding what this might have looked like. Perhaps not quite so pretty as that stone would suggest, but maybe not so far off, given that maybe these walls below here are somewhat original. But I suspect that rather than nice cut stone, they were more of this rock that you see over there, which would of course obviously have been native to this high mountain area. But the counterpoint is to these walls that we see, and then try to project in our mind lifting up these walls into the buildings and the towers that might have stood here. Because of course the purpose of the fort is to defend something, which usually means all of the people in the area, and so that means it has to have housing and all the infrastructure necessary to provide for such people. Here's a bar, or an area that converted to a bar. Guzma, which is that word up on top there, means cheers. That's actually Guzma. I have to shoot through exterior archway after archway. Now, I assume that these are the same people, the heroes of our tale, Skanderbeys and the men, which there were relatively few. I'm going to pan the older section as I give some insight into this area. Originally occupied by the Illyrian tribe, the Albani, this whole area of Albania was Illyrian at one time. And then it was captured by the Romans, no big surprise. In 1190 became a capital of an Albanian state. And then in 1443 it was captured by Skanderbeg. And I think the story behind that was that using a forged document from the Sultan, and he was able to get such a, or know about such a document because he was sent there as a young boy, a political hostage I suspect, from Albania to be in the Sultan's court, and as a consequence rose very, very high in their military. And when he came here, he decided to defect on behalf of his Albania, which is where, of course, he had come from. And that began the great history of Skanderbeg. Wonder how long that tree has stood there. But the restoration is lovely in the sense that it gives us a counterpoint of reference and understanding what this might have looked like. Perhaps not quite so pretty as that stone would suggest, but maybe not so far off, given that maybe these walls below here are somewhat original. But I suspect that rather than nice cut stone, they were more of this rock that you see over there, which would of course obviously have been native to this high mountain area. But the counterpoint is to these walls that we see, and then try to project in our mind lifting up these walls into the buildings and the towers that might have stood here. Because of course the purpose of the fort is to defend something, which usually means all of the people in the area, and so that means it has to have housing and all the infrastructure necessary to provide for such people. Here's a bar, or an area that converted to a bar. Guzma, which is that word up on top there, means cheers. That's actually Guzma. And I'll continue a nostalgic walk up this probably restored walkway that I'm on, which would have been the way perhaps that you entered into this entire complex. And I'll continue my climb up here into the village as far as I can go. And for as long as the absence of tourists continue, I'll continue to pan this so we can enjoy the ambience of this quiet moment. Who knows what all of these levels would have been used for in the past, but I would assume a heavy concentration of buildings and very narrow walkways. And of course, no surprise, the pizzeria is original. And it's this road that I didn't take that provides the alternative of minibuses with tourists to get access to this area more easily. And over there, somewhere, is the hotel that I was on the panorama view of. But what a rugged, spectacular place to live. And I assume that that green building was such a beautiful color as a mosque. They're interesting. Must be a soccer stadium built up here, or a field, and on to the far distance seating for it. What a great investment in energy that would have been up here. And I'm guessing that this is remnant of the earlier walls. Now a siege, of course, the purpose is to starve out your enemy who's inside the fort. So all your enemy has to do, in theory, is survive longer than your enemy wishes to. And that is part of the story. And here an abandoned stairway. There we'll get a closer look in a few minutes at those walls. And at this tower. Hopefully I can climb up into it. And maybe I'll sneak up that stairway just right now. A flower bed made from the stones. An interesting counterpoint to its original use. And here an old stairway which I'll climb up to be careful not to hurt anything. Here it looks like there was either a wall here that provided a double defensive perimeter for that tower, for this wall, and this area was probably filled in with buildings also. And again, construction with the obvious native material. When you see these lines like this, of course it tells you anywhere you're sighted that you're looking at a building outline. Some old, like this one, and others new, like that almost raw cement. What a majestic, rugged environment. And that area apparently is more and more development of this town. I wonder if it's solely based economically on tourism, although I did pass what I think is a cement plant and a quarry on the way up. And here we have a triangular shape outline. Perhaps it was just a platform that allowed people to look and fire out of these windows. And again, whether it's designs on pottery or a technology of fire and metal, etc., the designs of openings in forts were pretty much obvious over time. Create a wide-angled opening on this side so you could move about and get an angle of fire, but a narrow slot to shoot through, giving less exposure of yourself to your enemy. One can only hope that what we're looking at here are original. But given the economy of tourism and the past of tourism of Albania, I don't think this is a heavily used site yet, particularly considering all the grass in the area that I'm walking. Here you see the outline of this building, this curious rounded semicircular portion. Maybe it was for a fireplace, I don't know. Those appear to be the remnants of columns, but I don't know. Maybe that also. Interesting how large a space this is, and yet designed to give the opposite that I just described of a field of fire, a very wide field of fire. Maybe a cannon was mounted here. So to add to the story while I pan, while Skanderberg took control of it in 1444 or 43, it withstood apparently 4 consecutive sieges. And this was a siege of